You're listening to the Sermon Podcast of Brockport First Baptist. We are a progressive American Baptist congregation located about 20 minutes outside of Rochester, New York. To learn more about our church and support our ministries, please visit brockportfirstbaptist.org.
Our scripture reading for today is Genesis 39. It can be found on pages 31 through 32 of your pew Bibles. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there he had no concern for anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look with me here. My master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you're his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called out to the members of the household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you've brought among us came in to me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. And thank you, Jenna, for that reading. So we are back in our series, One Messed Up Family, The Next Generation, looking at the book of Genesis and specifically the story of Joseph. Do you guys remember Joseph? It's been 2 weeks since we talked about him, and I know how memories work. So just to refresh us, Joseph is the 11th of 12 brothers. He also happens to be the favorite. His 10 older brothers hate him for being the favorite, but they also hate him because Joseph's the kind of guy where everything just kind of works out for him. Have you known people like this? People who don't have to study and they still get an A. Everything they touch turns to gold. Every endeavor they try is successful. Don't you kind of hate people like that? They're annoying. Joseph is annoying. His brothers hate him, and so they attack him, throw him in a ditch, fake his death, and sell him into slavery, which is a bit of an overreaction, yes? I think we can all agree there was probably a better way to handle this situation. But our story picks up with Joseph enslaved in Egypt. He's sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's army. Potiphar is a military officer and captain of the guard. Interesting note with this, the text actually refers to him as the captain of the butchers. That's the literal translation of Potiphar's title, chief butcher, which is weird because military officers weren't typically tasked with preparing meat. The prevailing theory, and the reason our Bibles translate this captain of the guard, is that butcher was Hebrew slang. In the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, military officers are often called butchers. If you served armies of empires like Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, these kind of places, the Bible called you a butcher, which makes sense if you know the story and how these armies treated the ancient Israelites, yes? Yeah. Joseph is sold to the chief butcher of Egypt, the captain of Pharaoh's army. This puts Joseph in a very precarious position. He is not safe. This is not a good arrangement for him. He is in danger. That's what you need to know. That's what the text is kind of telling us between the lines heading into this story. Despite the danger, God is with Joseph and God blesses him. He quickly rises up the rank to become Potiphar's favorite. Everything he does prospers, and so Joseph is put in charge over the entire household. Things seem to be going really well for him until we meet Potiphar's wife. Verse 6, I'm going to read this part for us again. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking. Relatable. No. Joseph was handsome and good-looking, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here my master has no concern about anything in the house. He has put everything he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice, and when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled." This is where our story gets a little sticky. Welcome to Genesis. There's a trope in ancient literature, it's probably in a fair bit of modern literature too, of the temptress, the seductress, the cougar, right, in modern terms. It's a trope of an attractive, sexually aggressive woman who tempts our righteous hero and tries to make him stumble. It's a pretty worn out, one-dimensional depiction of women. And it's not very true to life, at least not in my experience. I have not known many women like this personally. I have known plenty of men like this, and this story was likely written by a man, so grain of salt. But unfortunately, the Bible is full of these seductress characters. You find them everywhere. From Samson and Delilah to David and Bathsheba, this trope pops up over and over and over again. We should note that we don't even know this lady's name, right? Like, it just calls her Potiphar's wife, which is not a great look. It's also worth noting that what Potiphar's wife does in this story isn't any different than what Abraham did to Hagar or what Jacob did to his two enslaved concubines. The book of Genesis has no shortage of male characters who exploit enslaved women. We remember most of those guys as heroes. We even sing songs about them in Sunday school class. They're complex moral characters that we're supposed to root for. However, once the shoe is on the other foot and the gender is flipped, it's a very different story. That's one problematic aspect of this passage. Another is its depiction of a false allegation of sexual assault. This story has been used for centuries by abusive men to cast doubt on survivors of abuse. I can think of at least one recent example of an evangelical pastor who was accused of sexual misconduct by a female congregant, and he used this story to defend himself. He pointed to Joseph, compared himself to Joseph, and insisted the allegations were untrue. Of course, then another woman came forward, and another, and another. It gets kind of hard to compare yourself to Joseph at that point. Before we go any deeper into this story, I want to share some statistics with you all that I think are really important to know and to bear in mind. For one, false allegations of sexual assault are extremely rare. You need to know that. They do not happen very often. According to a 2016 meta-analysis from the National Institutes of Health, only about 2 to 5% of sexual assault allegations prove to be untrue. 2 to 5%. That is not a lot. At the same time, the Justice Department estimates that as many as 80% of rapes and sexual assaults go unreported. 80%. And that's in the US, where we typically take the stories of survivors a little more seriously than in many other parts of the world. We have a problem with sexual assault reporting in our country, but it's not false allegations. It's underreporting and non-reporting. We need to remember that when we read this story. If you're using this story to cast doubt on survivors of sexual assault, you are doing it wrong. That's not the story. This is a story of enslavement. Understand the power dynamics here. Joseph is not some powerful politician or pastor insisting that the allegations against him are false. Joseph is a black man thrown in jail for looking at a white woman the wrong way. That is the modern analog of this story, if you're looking for one. Joseph's a slave. He's been reduced to an object, literally. Potiphar and his wife own him. Joseph is their property. If you're looking for a modern version of this story, if you're looking for echoes in our own history, look at our history of enslavement and how we continue to treat the bodies and sexuality of black and brown people today. The way we objectify women of color by presenting them as exotic. The trope of the sexually aggressive brown woman compared with the innocent and pure white woman. Tropes which completely dehumanize both. And we do the same thing to men of color. I think of the trope of the Latin lover. That's a tired old trope. Or how our media will portray black men as aggressive and predatory. When the President of the United States says that entire groups of immigrants are rapists and criminals, that is your modern version of the Joseph story right there. Joseph's ethnicity is front and center in this story. Potiphar's wife wants him because he's exotic. You can almost imagine her looking him up and down as he works, thinking, I've never had a Hebrew before. Notice what she says in verse 14. After she tries to sleep with Joseph and he runs away, we get this. Potiphar's wife called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled." Did you catch that? My husband has brought among us a Hebrew. As long as Joseph was the exotic object of desire, his ethnicity was not a problem at all. If anything, it was a bonus. But as soon as he exerts his own bodily autonomy and moral autonomy, his ethnicity is turned into a weapon against him. We do the same thing today. How should we as followers of Jesus relate to a society that continues to objectify and commodify people by race, ethnicity, class? How are we called to live differently from the rest of the world? The first thing I think we need to do is cultivate an awareness of the problem. That's really crucial. Be conscious of how our culture objectifies people. It's easy to become numb to this because it's so commonplace. It happens so often. It's so baked in how we tend to categorize and dehumanize people. It's easy to miss the racist tropes, the elitism, the power plays. We need to resensitize ourselves to this stuff. Pay attention to how different groups of people are portrayed in the books you read, the shows you watch, and the media you consume. Who are the heroes and who are the villains? Who are the objects of lust and desire? Who is the butt of the joke? What stereotypes are being reinforced? Who are the criminals? Who are the victims? These are the kind of questions we should be asking as followers of Jesus. There is a reason our media talks about black on black crime, but never white on white crime. Even though most victims of crime are victimized by people of the same race. If you're white, you are most likely to be victimized by another white person. But we never talk about white on white crime. There's a reason our media will run wild with the story of a brown-skinned immigrant killing a white woman, even though immigrants are far less likely statistically to commit violent crimes than native-born citizens. That's a fact. This is why we shouldn't take the bait of criticizing someone for not having a college degree or having the wrong background, being the wrong religion. That sort of thing is becoming more and more common today. It's becoming more and more acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable among us. That's objectifying. This is also part of the reason it is a bad idea to consume pornography. Christians will talk about porn being wrong because of lust and sexual immorality, obviously, but porn is also wrong because it is incredibly objectifying. The actors and the actresses are often reduced to racial categories, reinforcing all those racist tropes and stereotypes about the exotic person of color. If you consume this kind of stuff enough, you're going to start to think that way. Dehumanizing entire groups of people is just going to become second nature. You won't think of it anymore. We are always being discipled. When you open a web browser, scroll through social media, or watch cable news, you are being discipled. Powerful corporate interests are trying to shape you. They want you to buy what they want you to buy, think what they want you to think, and hate the people they want you to hate. Don't let them do that. Don't give the devil a foothold. We are disciples of Jesus, called to be shaped in the way of Jesus. Amen? Not in the way of Fox News, MSNBC, or YouTube. Be conscious of the way our culture objectifies people. The next step, number 2, is to become aware of your own social location and how that wires you to objectify others. Be aware of your social location and how that wires you to objectify others. This is the tricky one. The concept of owning your privilege has fallen on hard times lately. It's viewed as woke and therefore bad to acknowledge the way our society tends to prioritize certain groups of people over others. But that's not woke. It's not a left-wing agenda. It is an essential part of our discipleship in a pluralistic world. Understanding our social location helps us understand how the world is trying to shape us against the way of Jesus. Take Potiphar's wife as an example. Potiphar's wife has a certain degree of power and privilege. Her husband is an enlisted officer in the Egyptian army. He's Pharaoh's chief butcher. That gives her a tremendous amount of power over the people in her household. But Potiphar's wife is also a woman in the ancient world. She can't vote, she can't own land, she doesn't have a lot of rights. Arguably, she's just as much a piece of property as Joseph. But she is positioned to exercise authority over Joseph. And in a world that doesn't give women a ton of power, she has power over him, and that power is seductive. that power is corrupting. That power is dangerous. That power can make an otherwise good person do terrible things. White women in the antebellum South had it pretty rough. The South under slavery was extremely patriarchal. Spousal abuse rates were through the roof. Women didn't have a lot of power and authority, but if you were a white woman living on a plantation, you had power. You could tell enslaved people what to do, and they had to do it. Or if you were a poor white person living in the Jim Crow South, life was hard. You probably didn't have much money or dignity, but you could drink from any water fountain you wanted. No one was telling you to sit in the back of the bus. The objectification of your black neighbors under Jim Crow made you feel powerful. It made you inclined to support the very system that was marginalizing you. This is why people will vote for politicians whose policies are against their own self-interest. It doesn't matter if that leader is going to help you or not, if they make you feel strong, if they tap into the right racial stereotypes and lift up the right people as the enemy and the threat and promise to save you from them, you'll vote for them even if they cut your benefits. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. That's where this comes from. Be conscious of how our culture objectifies people. Be aware of your own social location and how that has wired you to participate in the objectification of others. We following this so far? Excellent. Last point. Opt out of our culture of objectification and start treating people as image bearers of God. Opt out of our culture of objectification and start treating other people as image bearers of God. I think the most revolutionary idea in the book of Genesis is probably found right on page 1. It's when God creates human beings in God's own image. Every person who has ever lived, according to page 1 of the Bible, is an image bearer of God, made in God's image, instilled with inherent worth, value, and dignity. That concept was unheard of in the ancient world. The Egyptians didn't talk like that. The Babylonians didn't talk like that. The Assyrians didn't talk like that. In most ancient cultures, it was the kings who were made in God's image. Monarchs, royalty, those were the image bearers of God. The sons of God were people like Nebuchadnezzar, Caesar, Pharaoh, King Herod. Those were the divine image bearers. Potiphar is a son of the gods, not Joseph. Joseph's a slave. He's an object. No divine image there. But it took a nation of slaves, the people who produced the book of Genesis, to articulate the fact that all people bear God's image, not just kings, not just monarchs, not just the rich and powerful, not just people who look like me and worship the same God I do. Everyone is an image bearer of God. My neighbors, my enemies, the rich and poor, men, women, non-binary folks, Democrats and Republicans, the uneducated and the highly educated and the overeducated, people who rank above you and the people you think are beneath you. Everyone bears the divine image. That's a revolutionary idea. The concept of universal human rights, that all people are created equal and endowed with their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That truth is not self-evident. It came from somewhere. Thomas Jefferson didn't come up with that. That wasn't Adam Smith, John Locke, or Aristotle. That was the book of Genesis. In the image of God, God created them. Revolutionary idea. This also happens to be part of the reason why Jewish folks have been hated by every empire that's ever existed. From ancient Babylon to Rome, Nazi Germany, Tsarist Russia, it's hard to maintain an authoritarian state when you've got a block of people going around telling everybody they're made in God's image. If we actually lived like everyone we meet is an image bearer of God, it would change the world. Entire industries would collapse. There would be no military-industrial complex anymore because no one's going to wage war against God's image bearers. Partisan politics would cease. Authoritarian movements would run out of fuel. There would be no money in exploiting and objectifying the human body. That's pretty pie in the sky utopian. So let's bring it down to earth and make it real. What does it look like for you to opt out of our culture of objectification? What would that consist of? Are there websites you need to block? News sources you need to stop watching? Do you need to put down the phone and limit your time on social media? Are there people you need to start listening to, forming bonds with, relationships you need to form? Hey, we have a workshop on forming relationships after church. You should come. That wasn't in my notes. I just thought of it. Are there risks you need to take? What would it look like for you to opt out of our culture of objectification? Before we go, I have a little homework for us this week, a little spiritual practice. I want you all to memorize a little mantra. You are a beloved child of God, made in God's image. Memorize this line, internalize it. Repeat it to yourself over and over and over again. You are a beloved child of God, made in God's image. That's true for every single person in this room. But even more importantly, it is true of everyone you will ever meet. That neighbor who's a jerk, that coworker who gets under your skin, you are a beloved child of God, made in God's image. When you see human bodies put on display to sell some product, or hear a politician bad-mouthing immigrants, or holding up someone on the other side they want you to hate, that's a beloved child of God made in God's image. Memorize that line, internalize it, repeat it to yourself every time you are tempted to hate, judge, or objectify a fellow image bearer of God. You are a beloved child of God made in God's image. Amen.